All right. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our session here. Accessibility. What do we mean? Where do we begin? And experiences to share. With increased use of our trails during COVID, we're all learning that there's more that we need to do to make our trails more accessible for all. And across the country, organizations have seen about 200 to 400% increased trail use, according to American Trails. My name is Julie Early. I'm with the Compact as well as the Dennis Conservation Land Trust, and I'll be facilitating this session. We've got three great presenters for you today: Jim Bride, Lucy Gertz, and Susan Moynihan. Jim is the Executive Director of the Civic and Lands Trust in Marion. Lucy Gertz is the statewide Education Projects Manager at Mass Audubon. And Sue Moynihan is the Chief of Interpretation and Cultural Resources Management at the Cape Cod National Seashore. And they'll explore how their organizations have incorporated accessibility into their planning, programming, and current thinking.
Julie?
Presenters will have 5 minutes each, which is really short. Sorry about that.
Julie, if I can just interrupt briefly, not everyone's, can everyone do a thumbs up if you can see Julie's slide? I'm seeing it, but I think some people are having issues.
Okay.
What I'm seeing is an ocean scene with a winding road. Looks like the Big Sur coast, maybe. Beautiful.
Oh, huh.
That's what I'm seeing as well.
That's
Oh,
what I'm
so
saying.
let's see.
And it is beautiful.
Okay, so it says that I'm screen share. I'll stop again and I'll start screen sharing once again. And it says that I'm screen sharing. Can you see it now?
The mountains with the ocean, just that one picture.
Okay, let's see. Okay, my apologies. Let's see. So that would be my screen.
So when you hit screen share, it might give you some options to select your overall screen or a specific program. Do you see those options pop up?
I'm sorry, no, I apologize here. This is a problem. Where would that be? Sorry.
So when you hit screen share,
Yes.
so I'm gonna stop the screen share for just 1 second. So when you hit share, it might show screen, or if you have, are you doing it from a PowerPoint or from PDFs?
I'm doing it from the PowerPoint.
Okay, and you have your PowerPoint slideshow open somewhere on your computer?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
yes, I
so
do.
when you hit screen share, you
Yes.
should have an option to select a window, and you can select that PowerPoint, and it should come up pretty easily that way.
Okay, my apologies. It's not, no, it's not coming up in that regard. I'm sorry, it's showing that it is screen sharing. May I send this to you? Is that the best way to do that? Okay.
Sure, you can do that. Yep, you can send it right to my email address.
Okay. I don't know how this is not working. Okay.
Apologies, everyone. We will get this
I know, my
squared
apologies.
away. Is it an emailable size, Julie?
That is a good question. I apologize here. Let's see. It is a large size.
Sarah, I just tried to email it to you, so maybe
Yeah, thank you.
maybe you'll get it from me.
Okay. Or actually, Lucy, do you want to try screen sharing? If you have a copy?
Sure, let me pull it up again.
Let's do that.
All right. Hmm.
Sarah, it says I cannot start share screen while the other participant is sharing.
Okay. So I'm screen sharing. I'm stopping my share, and you should be able to do that now.
Did it come up?
Yes.
Good.
Does it look fine?
If you can make it full screen.
Yeah.
So yeah. And let's see. Let's see. There is an option to make it full screen at the top. But if not, we can work with this. It's a readable size.
Okay, would it, do you see any of those options?
So they disappear for me when I'm not screen sharing. So I'm trying to remember where they are. Let's see. I'd say let's just, for purposes of time, let's go with this.
Okay, let me just test it and make sure I can advance it.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, I think did it advance?
Yes.
Okay, fine. I can control the slides from here.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, so so why don't we just start in, and if Jim, do you want to take your first? We can just move it forward, Lucy, to the next slide. Accessibility, just giving a view that we do have multiple definitions of accessibility. And what we want to talk about here today is each organization's ability to take these different views of accessibility and employ them in trail management as well as within the organization. And Jim, you want to begin then?
Sure, I'm happy to go ahead. My name is Jim Bride. I'm the Executive Director of the Sipican Lands Trust in Marion, Mass. And I'm delighted to talk to you about our Osprey Marsh universally accessible boardwalk project that we completed a few years ago in Marion, Massachusetts. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the project. So in order to build this universally accessible boardwalk, we had to design, permit, and then construct or build the boardwalk and universally accessible pathway. And so what we ended up doing is building an 1,800-foot universally accessible boardwalk and pathway through sensitive salt marsh habitat on a 20-acre property that Sipican Lands Trust has, and we did it for under $400,000. We also, part of the project goal was to create a space and boardwalk and pathway where all visitors can enjoy nature, kind of the universal aspect of it. And as we were thinking about this project, we had to incorporate elements of universal design and ADA accessibility into the feature of the boardwalk. And the picture to the left actually this is the project, and these are recent visitors, dogs actually whose hind legs are paralyzed, so they have devices here where they can walk on the boardwalk, and they were using our boardwalk in November of 2021. So when we're talking about universal design, I guess it is universal for all types of creatures. Next slide, please. So the result of our work of the designing and the permitting and fundraising effort is we constructed an 1,800-foot universally accessible boardwalk that features both a wooden boardwalk and stone dust path sections, including at the very end of it, a 12 by 12 viewing platform. The project itself has increased accessibility to nature and the outdoors for many of our visitors. And I think the third point here is that it's really engaged constituents offering, we've offered input to improve the visitor experience for all users, but also it's given them, all users, an opportunity to engage out in nature on an accessible boardwalk and pathway. And the picture to the left features a resident of Marion, Hannah Strom, with her brother, and Hannah was in a bad car accident a few years ago. And she was able to go down the boardwalk in a wheelchair with her brother. And I think they were delighted with the whole experience. And that's a great achievement. Next slide, please. The takeaways, and I will emphasize the plural of the takeaways. We've enjoyed increased visitor use at our Osprey Marsh property, no doubt about it. Even before the pandemic hit, this was built, people have just enjoyed, people with limited mobility, wheelchair users, everyone, all users have enjoyed the accessibility of this boardwalk and just getting out into nature. We've experienced strong community support for the boardwalk project, with commitment from the town of Marion to fund a future education pavilion at the site using Community Preservation Act funds. And the takeaways is that it's presented Suffolk County Lands Trust with additional opportunities to incorporate accessibility features for vision impaired users, wheelchair users, and future users. And we are continuing to learn about what accessibility means at our boardwalk site. I mean, I think we've learned some lessons. We're continuing to learn lessons, and really thinking about the universal aspects of making it accessible for all. Next slide. I'd like to turn it over to Lucy from the Mass Audubon.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
Jim.
you.
I hope those slides worked okay.
Mhm.
So welcome, good morning, everybody, and thanks for your interest in Mass Audubon's All Persons Trails. I'm going to give you an introduction and background of how we develop these trails and operate them, and a little bit more about what we've learned along the way. So since 2005, I have been the coordinating project manager for Mass Audubon's All Persons Trail project. We operate 12, going on 13 right now, and we have 3 or 4 in development. And ultimately, our goal is to have 20 or more All Persons Trails around the site, around the state, at most or all of our staffed sanctuaries and nature centers, and a few select unstaffed sites. The big pieces of this project include doing physical site planning and design, a huge amount of fundraising and grant writing, permitting and construction, because so many of these All Persons Trails include segments that go into wetland areas, our boardwalks over vegetated buffer zones, things like that, and then we have this inclusive planning process that we undergo, and the whole thing takes about 1.5 years once we have the funding. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. We have found that developing these All Persons Trails, for them to be truly well-designed, inclusive, and user-friendly, and well-used after they're built and opened, we really prioritize partnerships with community organizations that support individuals with a whole range of abilities. Accessibility consultants. I have a team of 4 accessibility consultants who've helped me with every one of these trails. And we get local supporters and funders, and then most importantly, for each of the trails, before we consider the planning done and before we cut the ribbon, we have 7 to 10 local testers who bring a range of perspectives and abilities to test what we have planned and help us finalize the plans, so that they're as user, they're useful for as wide a group of users as possible. There's also a very big piece involving building staff capacity in our organization so that all of our staff and volunteers who greet visitors, who answer questions about accessibility or about the trails, are proficient on ADA regulations and know basics. We call it Accessibility 101, language etiquette, standards, how Mass Audubon's going beyond ADA in most cases, intentionally and by design, and make sure that we incorporate inclusive customer service in to all of our staff. Anyone who might encounter someone from the public coming. So visitor services staff, property staff, volunteers, educators, everyone. And then how important it is to communicate about the trails. And so we make sure our website has all the materials available about the trails. The trail materials are formatted in multiple formats. I'll explain that in a minute. And that everyone's equipped to answer questions in a way that is appropriate and follows ADA regulations. This is what the trails look like physically. We have really welcoming signage in English and Spanish because that now reaches 90% of the Massachusetts residents speak or understand English and Spanish. The signs related to the trails on the trails themselves, on the all persons trails, are written in bold print and Braille. And we have tactile features along the way that are also labeled in bold print and Braille. And where possible, we use icons and images as well as lettering so that people who pre-readers, young visitors who are pre-readers, or people who don't read English, in some cases when that's the only thing on the sign, we think the picture also helps guide them to those resources. There's a lot of physical support involved. So we have navigation cues like post and rope guiding systems for people who have vision or balance limitations or confidence levels where the rope guide helps them enjoy the trail. And for someone who's totally blind, the rope guide allows them to visit and use the trail completely independently, which we realize is a very important and opportunity for a lot of people to spend time alone in nature. And the boardwalks and have safety bumps and railings. The picnic tables are along the way are ADA designed, so you don't have to climb over anything to get to use the picnic table. You can see on the edge of the picnic table here, you could roll up a stroller, a wheelchair, or walker and use the table. And then here's on the bottom right is an image of the beading system we use to indicate to someone who's using the post and rope guiding system, someone who would be totally blind or mostly blind, would use the beads. And so a round bead indicates an interpretive stop on the trail tour if you're following the tour, and a square bead indicates seating is nearby. And if you have the tour materials, which are available in audio, print, and Braille, then you know what the beads mean and you're following the tour. We also have tactile multisensory stops along the way. We have sculptures, we have natural features people can reach out and touch, and we have sustainability features, which in towns that allow it, we can let people go right up and touch our solar panels or other water saving features. And where possible, we have raised bed gardens where people can explore the textures and smells of some of the things planted there. The materials are available in audio, and people can access that ahead of time on the website before their visit, or they can access it through cell phone at some of the sites where the signal's strong enough. And we have an audio player that we loan out that's preloaded with the tour of the season, whatever season we're in, it's ready to go. And it's pretty easy to use. We also have the tour printed online. People can load it onto their own device, print it, carry it with them, or access and borrow the materials when they get there. We have regular print, large print, and Braille. And the printed version online can be printed in whatever type, font, and color contrast is most usable for someone with vision, with a range of vision. So here's just some images of people enjoying the trail. And we now use the trails for, well, visitors who have, many visitors have their own experience, visitors of all abilities of using the trails, people who need the ADA compliant surfacing and who need the navigational cues, as well as families, people who haven't done a whole lot of walking on trails, who might not want to come in contact with vegetation or poison ivy or ticks. The trails are wide, they're well marked. They're right near the parking lot and the nature play areas and the wildlife observation areas. And so it's a very comfortable introductory route in many cases. They don't go that far. Our longest trail is a half mile right now. although I think we're about to exceed that with our next trail. That might be 3/4 of a mile. And there's really clear signage, lots of seating. And so these trails are very user-friendly for a range of users, including people, multi-generational groups with older or very younger family members or group members, as well as people who really do rely on the ADA features. And here's what we have learned along the way. We're operating 12. I think I have to upgrade that to 13. We invite every visitor who uses the trail materials to give us feedback, and we've been collecting visitor feedback and since our first trail opened in Norfolk at Stony Brook Wildlife Sanctuary in 2005, around then. And we have incorporated that feedback in every trail we've done. So all 12 trails have been overlaid with the interpretive tour by being informed of what we've learned from feedback in previous trails. So it's definitely a progression. We are learning. The new trails we're working on now get to be better and better. There's a lot of networking involved with other organizations that provide outdoor accessible interpretive or recreational experiences. We freely share the information with others. We wrote the guidelines manual, which is available online for free. It's an 80-page manual on what we've learned and what we do. And we have a video, and I believe Julie put that in the link. And we're constantly expanding our perception of inclusivity. And as I said, all these family groups and people who are newer to spending time in nature, spending time on these trails because they're just more welcoming and comfortable until people get more confident if they want to, or they just stay on these very well-groomed, easy trails because that's where they're interested. And that whole perception of what accessibility includes, we've learned not only ADA compliance, but going way beyond ADA compliance. We're trying to universally design these experiences, and that includes offering information on public transportation, how people could access our sanctuaries. In some cases, they have to take paratransit, but the ride services have really helped a lot of people get to our trails. So we're happy about that. The customer service never gets less important. It's always a high priority. Having the materials in these multiple formats, having the information available in advance is very important to people who need accommodations, and seeing how far we can go in providing the greatest level of independence for exploring these trails. We can't put post and rope guides on all of them. It doesn't always work with the landscape and the topography, or, we can't always make every trail our ideal trail, but we come as close as we can with the suite of components that we know are the ideal. And then there's a tremendous amount of outreach that's usually required to get people to help us improve the trails and use the trails and have their constituents use the trails. So we have a lot of partner groups that use the trails. So with that, I think my time is up, and I'm going to hand it over to Sue.
Morning, everybody, and thanks very much for the invitation. My name is Sue Moynihan, and I'm the Chief of Interpretation and Cultural Resources Management at Cape Cod National Seashore. And I'm going to share a little bit of perspective this morning on how we address accessibility and inclusiveness on federal lands as represented by the National Seashore. Next slide, please. So the seashore is located in far eastern Massachusetts, and I suspect that most in the group today know where we are located. We're on the Wampanoag homeland, and we are within the 6 towns on the Outer Cape, from Chatham to the south, all the way up to Provincetown to the north. We have very diverse natural resources, cultural resources, and of course, recreational opportunities that attract over 4 million annual visits. Next slide, please. So really everything that we do nests under the National Park Service mission, which aims really to do 2 things, and that's to protect resources, whether they're natural resources or cultural resources, and also to serve visitors and provide for recreation. And I italicized the words preserves unimpaired, because when we have a tough decision to make, maintaining our resources unimpaired always takes precedent over the public enjoyment and access aspect of our mission. Next slide, please. So we are committed, and we aim to be as inclusive and as accessible as we can, so that people of all backgrounds and experiences and abilities feel welcome. And it's sort of an interesting point. We hear a lot about the ADA, and interestingly, the executive branch of the government under which the National Park Service and Department of Interior nest, we do not adhere to the ADA. Instead, we adhere to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And it doesn't mean that we ignore ADA, but really our laws are found in the Rehab Act. And when we have the choice, we always go for the most accessible law. We go for that highest level of accessibility. Next slide, please. So this morning already, we've talked a lot about mobility, and that's certainly an aim of the National Seashore. And if you visit our beaches, you'll know that during the summer, we have beach wheelchairs available at several of our beaches for visitors to borrow. We also have Moby Mats. I think we have 5 miles of Moby Mat laid out. And we find that when you make someplace accessible for one population, there are benefits to others as well. So even though the Moby Mat is intended to help people who have walking difficulties, it's also great for families pushing strollers onto the beach, or people lugging those coolers in their little trailers. We also have a number of boardwalks at many of our areas. And one thing to point out is that we accept, we try to make everything as accessible as we can, but we do accept that some of our places simply cannot be made physically accessible. We have some of our beaches that the parking lots are at the top of a high coastal bank, and we cannot we can't have paths and ramps. We have tall, skinny lighthouses with spiral staircases. So we look for ways to make the stories accessible, even though some of these locations may not be. Next slide, please. So we have numerous features that appeal to people who have difficulty hearing or low or no usable vision. A couple of examples here, like Mass Audubon, we do have a Braille Trail. And ours was, I believe, the pioneering trail perhaps in the state. It's the Buttonbush Trail in Eastham, and it was designed with Perkins School for the Blind. So it has guide ropes. It goes through a very sensory rich environment, forest, wetland. I will say one interesting thing that both the previous speakers mentioned was this concept of universal accessibility, and to try to design a trail that's accessible to people of all abilities. We acknowledge that the Buttonbush Trail has steps, it has tree roots, it has elevation, it has a low elevation that floods every winter with the water table. So if we were going to design this trail today, we probably would make it accessible to people of all abilities. But this is a wonderful resource in Eastham. We also have brochures that we've translated into Braille. We have tactile exhibits. And then for people who have difficulty hearing, all of our films are captioned, and some of our exhibits describe nature sounds. And then occasionally on request, when we can, we provide a sign language interpreter. Next slide, please. So one really new area for us is the idea of digital accessibility. And I mentioned that we follow the Rehabilitation Act. Section 508 of that act compels us to make our digital and IT related media accessible. So this really is a new area for us. And if you think about how people plan their visits, there's a lot of use of websites and social media, YouTube videos. And so we do a couple of things to make sure our media, our digital messaging is accessible. Many people come to our website and our social media with the use of screen readers. So all of our PDFs that we upload to the web are remediated so they can be read by screen readers. If you follow us on social media, you'll notice that if we have a short video, we describe what is happening and what the sounds are in that video. And we always include alt text with our social media, and that's a description of what is in the image. And that just helps make these forms of media accessible to more people. And then a final area I just want to touch on is cognitive and intellectual accessibility. We go to a lot of effort to tell these really rich stories And we want to make sure that people can understand them. And not everyone has a PhD or a master's degree in whatever we're talking about. So for our content to be digestible and understandable, we do run them through readability tools. And there's several tools out there that you can use that will churn out, this is grade 11 reading level, or this is grade 9 reading level. So we do try to think about who is reading our material, what do they maybe already know about this topic, and how can we make it accessible cognitively. Next slide, please. And finally, I'll just mention this resource that I think Julie probably put in the chat, and that's the accessibility guidelines for the National Park Service. We've done a lot of work with everything from color contrast, point size, and fonts to wheelchair navigability for interior exhibits. So it's really a good resource, and I'm sure your organizations have them as well. But if you're interested in more of this information in this topic, I would suggest downloading that link that Julie has put in the chat. So back to Julie, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Lucy, for helping out there. I wanted to just see, I don't see any questions right now. If anybody has a question, pop it in the chat if you would. And I can start off with a few questions myself. And Jim, you stressed the community's support. And I was wondering, as people begin to get involved in the topic of accessibility, how would you suggest that we reach out to the community to get them involved on a project like this?
Thank you, Julie. I would suggest, obviously, start, if you're a nonprofit organization, start with your board members, start with your friends, supporters, donors, and members to talk to them about a project of this nature. What we learned is that there are a lot of supporters who had connections to friends, family members who use wheelchairs, who have limited mobility. So they were giving input on the design and the project, and reach out to the community, town support, press releases, through social media, to engage your community members. And I say that not just for recipients land interest, not just the Marion community, but the broader community, because there are people from all over the South Coast area and Massachusetts who are interested in visiting these boardwalks or sites or properties that have accessibility built into them. It's a good deal for all.
Okay, thanks. And Sarah, do you want to read your question?
Sure. So sort of for a panel question, one of the things that I think about a lot when I'm designing a new trail for one of our sites is what's the best substrate to go with, because every substrate has some level of maintenance. And over marshes, it's pretty clear you've got to go with Boardwalk and sand, Moby Mat. But when you're on an upland stretch of trail, what have been some of your favorite low maintenance types of substrates to go with?
I'll try to answer that. I'm not sure any of them would be called low maintenance yet, because we're still experimenting, but we do have this, our trail builder calls it the ADA mix. And it's a mixture of crushed stone, pellet size and larger. And so that's I can't explain it more than that, because it's just simply called the ADA mix for us, but he's always perfecting it. It's Trail Builders Association out of Vermont that we mostly work with. And so they probably have information on the website. I know it's in our manual. So that would be probably one approach. The other is sometimes it's just an adequately packed soil surface that we can use for a stretch. And then through grassy areas, we've been experimenting with this thing called grass pave. We have it at 2 of our sites. And it looks like kind of what would come off of a 6-pack of like soda or beer. So these little canisters go in the ground, you fill them with loam, and then you plant grass over it. And it allows a grassy path to really support the weight of a wheelchair or other mobility device. It's worked better inland than on the coast with the sandy soils, but we've just done a second installation of grass pave in South Dartmouth, and we're hoping the grass will come in just fine before spring. So I'm not sure how low maintenance it is, but we're learning.
Great. Kelly, do you want to do you want to answer, or I'm sorry, do you want to ask your question, please?
Sure, I had two. Curious about any recommended funding sources. The ones I can think of are Mass Trails Grant, but anything else is helpful, as well as some lesser known potential sources. And I guess my first thought was CPA. And then if there's an available list of accessibility consultants.
Yeah, who wants to take that on?
Well, I mean, I think the Mass Trails Grant is a very good way to go. Private donors, supporters, foundations. If they're, I think more, foundations that are interested in accessibility issues, and looking at funding. And we also went to, I don't know where you're from, Kelly, but as I said, the commitment from the town of Marion through their CPA, Community Preservation Act funds, was really exciting, and community investment in the project helped a lot. So I think there's funding there.
And I can add a little bit more on that. Are you done, Jim?
I am done.
So in addition to everything Jim mentioned, several of our trails have been built in phases because of the funding, and sometimes the Rec Trails grants have covered one of the phases. So that's always a good idea. And in addition to the foundations, donors that Jim mentioned, we have utilized CPA funds in some towns. We've had the Conservation Commission help fund some of the signage, because it's one of their imperatives to do education on wetlands. And so that has been a good partnership. Lions Club International and local Lions clubs have helped fund some of the tactile and audio components and some of the equipment needed to support that. And not that we want to do this often, but environmental disaster mitigation funds have been used to build at least one of our trails, because of the Buzzards Bay oil spill, because it diminished or impacted recreational opportunities. We were able to get one of the funding allocations to build an all-persons trail along Buzzards Bay. So again, we don't want to do that a lot, but when those things happen, sometimes mitigation funds can be used.
And the question about consultants, where do you find consultants?
I can answer that one for who we consult with. So I mentioned Perkins School for the Blind, and I think Perkins also, that was decades ago for us, but I think Lucy mentioned that they are consulting with them for some of their newer trails. Across the state, I know on the Cape, there are sight loss service groups, and some of those constituents can come to your site and provide an experiential reaction to something that you're talking about. There are also veterans groups. So we've reached out to a few of those organizations when we've really wanted, you don't want to create something that no one is going to use, and you really want to have some really good ground truthing and testing, before you invest all this money in something. Is it usable? Is it friendly? And sometimes you can do one little thing to make it better. So for decades, we did not have the steps on the Buttonbush Trail painted white. No one had ever mentioned that before. We had someone from Sight Loss Services a couple of years come out and walk that trail. And she said it really would make a huge difference. So here, this trail that has been in, for 30 plus years, 2 years ago, we just did one little thing and it made it so much better. So I would go to those community organizations, I think, as a starting point.
And it looks like we have only a minute, maybe 2 minutes left. Maybe Alan, do you want to ask your question? And then we'll close.
Sorry, one of the speakers mentioned that their website was readable by people who had a text to speech. How do you know if your website is readable? Is there some, and there were a bunch of other details, like where do you guys go to get those details to make sure your things are in fact working?
Yes, I think you're talking about the National Seashore. So all of our PDFs are readable. So we go to a company called Splashbox, and they do what's called remediation. What they do is they translate it into a format that will be readable to a screen reader. And that they can do everything from simple, a Word document to something very complicated like a shorebird report that is full of charts and tables. The other thing that we do is we describe all of our images. So if there's an image of people sitting on the beach on our website, there will be a caption under it. And then if you hover over it, you'll see the sort of the flyover alternate text. A lot of that is embedded in how we build the site. And a lot of that, how that's done is just built into this website, which is National Park Service wide. It isn't specific to us. I don't know if that helps.
Well, I think we've come to an end of our time, but if those of you who have additional questions could contact the speakers. I want to thank the speakers. I want to thank Sarah for your help. Again, thanks, Lucy, for pitching in. I guess I have to work on my Zoom skills, but and thank you all for your patience and for your participation and for thinking about this topic. I think we'll all be thinking about it more as we move forward for visioning as well as for our programs and where we all go. It's good for all of us, right? So thank you all. Have a good rest of your weekend. Take care.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Great talk this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will save the details from the chat, and this is being recorded. So we will make
Super.
those details available for everyone. There'll be a
Excellent.
follow-up email that goes to all participants.
Thanks for your help.
All
That
right,
sounds
thank
great.
you all. Great to meet
Yeah.
you all.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks, Lucy.
Bye.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.
Bye.